In this section, we will discuss the spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system, and the spinal nerves, which are part of the peripheral nervous system. We'll start out with the anatomy of the spinal cord. We'll take a look at the anatomical features of the spinal cord and spinal nerves, and discuss the functions of the spinal cord. The spinal cord belongs to the central nervous system, which is enclosed in a bony covering, the vertebral canal. The peripheral nervous system includes the spinal nerves after they exit the spinal cord, and involves the somatic reflexes, which are integrated in the spinal cord, but travel on peripheral nerves. The spinal cord is an information highway between the brain and the body. It extends through the vertebral canal from the foramen magnum all the way down to the first lumbar vertebra, L1. It doesn't go all the way down to the sacrum. Each pair of spinal nerves receives sensory information and issues motor signals to muscles and glands. The spinal cord is a component of the central nervous system, while the spinal nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. The functions of the spinal cord include conduction, taking signals from the body to the brain and from the brain to the body, and we do this along bundles of fibers, which we call tracts. These pass information up and down. Locomotion is another function of the spinal cord. Locomotion, or walking, is a repetitive, coordinated action of several muscle groups. Inside of our spinal cord, we have central pattern generators, which are pools of neurons that provide control of flexors and extensors. So these basically synchronize the flexors and extensors of our opposing legs in order to help us walk. The spinal cord also helps with somatic reflexes. Reflexes are involuntary, stereotyped responses to stimuli, like removing your hand from a hot stove. Reflexes involve the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. The spinal cord and peripheral nerves do most of the work, but the brain is also notified of what's going on. The meninges of the spinal cord are exactly the same as the meninges of the brain. There are three fibrous layers enclosing the spinal cord. The dura mater is the outermost layer, and it's a tough collagenous membrane surrounded by an epidural space filled with fat and blood vessels. The dura mater is continuous with the epineurium that surrounds spinal nerves. The arachnoid matter is a layer of simple squamous epithelium that lines the dura mater and a loose mesh of fibers that are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The space between these loose mesh of fibers creates the subarachnoid space, which is between the arachnoid matter and the pia mater. The pia mater is a very delicate membrane adherent directly to the spinal cord. You can see the epidural space just above the spinal cord and dura mater in this slide, and you can see the vertebra that surrounds the spinal cord. You can see the spinal nerves exiting through the intervertebral foramen, and you can also see the loose mesh of fibers that form the subarachnoid space. The spinal cord has a number of features. It's a cylinder of nerve tissue within the vertebral canal, basically all of the vertebral foramen as they go down, and it's about as thick as a finger. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that arise from the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral regions of the cord. Each cord segment, which is between two vertebrae, gives rise to a pair of spinal nerves, a left and a right spinal nerve. The spinal cord has enlargements or bulges. We have one in our cervical spine and one in our lumbar spine. These are areas that are slightly thicker than the spinal cord in the thoracic region. The medullary cone is the tapered tip of the cord that ends at L1. The cauda equina is the roots of the spinal nerves L2 to S5. 5, and they resemble a horse's tail, which is why it's called the cauda equina. Once we get to L1, what's in the vertebral canal is just this bundle of nerve roots instead of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a cylinder of white matter that has a central area of gray matter that's shaped sort of like a butterfly. The white matter is divided into 3 columns on each half of the spinal cord. The white matter columns are the posterior white column, the lateral white column, and the ventral white column, and we have each of those on each side, right and left, of the spinal cord. The gray matter in the spinal cord is neuron cell bodies with very little myelin, so neuron cell bodies and synapses. The white matter contains myelinated axons that are traveling up and down the spinal cord. Our sensory input comes in on the dorsal horn, both visceral and somatic. The somatic motor neuron cell bodies are in the ventral horn, and the motor neurons, their axons, leave through the ventral root. Next, we'll take a look at some of the physiology of the spinal cord.